The rain had been falling since morning, steady and cold, washing the streets in a dull silver glow. People hurried along the sidewalks, heads bent under umbrellas, shoes splashing through shallow puddles. It was a typical gray afternoon in the city. Nothing special, nothing new. But for the young woman standing across the street from a small cafe, it felt like the longest day of her life. She pressed her thin hands together for warmth, her fingers stiff and pale from the chill. Her coat, once neat and soft, was now faded and frayed at the sleeves. The wind tugged at her hair, damp and tangled, sticking to her face. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. Her stomach had stopped growling hours ago. Now it only ached quietly, like it had given up too. Across the glass window, she could see people sitting inside the cafe, laughing, talking, sipping coffee from steaming mugs. The smell of baked bread and roasted beans floated out each time someone opened the door. It made her chest tighten with longing, not just for the food, but for that feeling of warmth, of belonging somewhere, even for a few minutes. The cafe wasn't fancy. It was small and old, with a flickering sign that said Cafe Luna, the kind of place where people came after work, where music sometimes played softly in the background. She had walked by it many times before, but never had the courage to go in. Today, though, something in her was different. Maybe it was the hunger. Maybe it was the exhaustion that comes when you've run out of options. Or maybe deep inside she still carried that quiet spark that refused to die. The part of her that believed she could still offer something to the world. Inside the cafe, an old upright piano sat in the corner. Its wood was scratched and some of the keys were yellowed, but it was still beautiful to her eyes. She stared at it through the window for a long moment, her heart beating faster. It had been years since she had touched one. Her fingers itched at the memory. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Warm air wrapped around her, carrying the scent of coffee and sugar. A few heads turned as she stepped inside. Her shoes were muddy, her clothes damp. She looked out of place among the clean tables and smiling faces. Still, she forced a small, polite smile and walked toward the counter. The man behind it, middle-aged, tall, with tired eyes, looked up from wiping a cup. "Can I help you?" he asked, not unkindly, but with the tone of someone who already expected a strange request. She swallowed hard. Her voice trembled a little. I was wondering," she glanced toward the piano in the corner, "if I could play for a little while." The man frowned, confused. "Play?" "Yes," she said softly. "The piano? Just one song?" He raised an eyebrow. "We don't really do that here. This isn't that kind of place." "I understand," she said quickly. "I only ask because if I could play a piece, maybe you could give me something to eat in return. Just a small meal." For a moment, silence stretched between them. A few customers who had overheard began whispering. One of them, a young couple sitting near the window, exchanged amused looks. The woman giggled under her breath. Someone at the back muttered, "Another one of those street performers." The man behind the counter sighed and set the cup down. "Listen, miss," he said, trying to sound patient. "We're not hiring musicians. You should try the square. People play there for coins." Her eyes dropped to the floor. "I know, but—" "The piano here, it's special. It's the same kind my father used to play." He hesitated, his expression softening just a little. There was something about her tone, humble, not desperate, but filled with quiet sincerity. "You really can play?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, sir, I can." The young couple laughed again, not cruelly, but with the kind of disbelief that people feel when they think they're watching a scene from a movie. The man shrugged and gestured toward the piano. "All right then," he said. "One song, but I can't promise anything after that." She looked up, surprised. "Thank you." As she walked to the piano, the whispers followed her. Someone said, "She probably doesn't even know how to play." Another voice added, "Bet she'll bang the keys for 2 minutes and leave." The laughter stung, but she didn't react. She was used to it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the piano lid. Dust rose in the air, catching the light. She ran her hand across the keys. They were cool beneath her skin, a mix of smooth ivory and worn edges. Her reflection wavered faintly in the glossy surface, and for a second she saw not the tired, hungry woman she had become, but the little girl she once was, sitting beside her father as he taught her how to play. He had told her once, "Music doesn't come from your fingers, my dear. It comes from everything you've lived." Every tear, every laugh, every quiet night. She took a deep breath. Then she began to play. At first, the notes were soft, hesitant, as if her hands were searching for old memories. But soon they found their rhythm, and the sound filled the cafe like sunlight breaking through clouds. The melody rose and fell, gentle yet strong, carrying warmth and sadness all at once. The laughter faded. Conversation stopped. Even the sound of the coffee machine seemed to pause for a moment. People turned their heads one by one. The couple near the window no longer smiled. The barista froze mid-step. The man behind the counter leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing in surprise. The young woman played as if she had forgotten where she was. Every note came alive with feeling, hope, pain, love. The kind of emotion that can't be faked. Her hands moved gracefully, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. An old man sitting by the wall closed his eyes, listening. He hadn't heard a melody like that in years. It reminded him of something. A concert long ago, a name he couldn't quite recall. The final note lingered in the air, trembling softly before fading into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then someone clapped. Then another. Soon the small cafe was filled with applause, not loud or showy, but warm, genuine. The young woman blinked in surprise. She hadn't played for applause. She had played because she needed to feel alive again, even just for a few minutes. She stood up slowly, her cheeks flushed. "Thank you," she said softly. The man behind the counter stepped forward, still staring at her. That was beautiful," he said. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She hesitated. "My father taught me," he nodded, still looking dazed. "Well, you've earned yourself a meal, that's for sure. Sit down, I'll bring you something warm." Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Of course," he said. "It's the least I can do after hearing that." She smiled, a small, tired smile, but full of gratitude. "Thank you, sir." She sat near the piano, wrapping her hands around the cup of tea they gave her. The warmth spread through her fingers, up her arms, melting the chill that had settled deep inside. As she ate the bowl of soup that followed, a few customers approached her. They asked simple questions. What was the piece she played, where she had learned? She answered softly, never revealing too much. The truth was, she hadn't told anyone who her father really was. She didn't think it mattered anymore. But the old man by the wall watched her with quiet curiosity. His mind was turning over memories. The way she moved her hands across the keys, the tone of her music, it all felt familiar. He leaned toward her gently and said, "That song you played? It sounded like something by Luca Moretti. You know him?" The name hit her like a soft echo from the past. She lowered her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I know him." The old man smiled kindly. "He was one of the greatest pianists of his time. I once saw him perform when I was young. You play just like him." She didn't answer, just smiled faintly and thanked him. Inside, her heart ached and warmed at the same time. It had been so long since anyone had said her father's name aloud. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds began to break apart and a thin ray of sunlight touched the cafe window. The young woman finished her meal quietly, then stood. "Thank you again," she said to the cafe owner. "For the food. And for letting me play," he nodded. "Come by anytime," he said. "The piano's here for you." She looked at the piano one last time before stepping outside. The air smelled fresh, clean after the rain. She pulled her coat tighter and began to walk down the street, her steps slow but lighter than before. Behind her, through the window, the cafe was still buzzing softly. People were still talking about her performance, who she might be, where she had come from, but she didn't hear any of it. Her heart was full of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, she believed it might be worth finding out. That night, after leaving the cafe, the young woman walked along the quiet streets until she reached the park at the edge of town. The rain had stopped hours ago, and the sky had cleared enough for a few stars to show. She sat on a bench beneath an old lamppost, clutching the thin coat around her shoulders. The sound of her music still echoed in her head, each note soft and fading like distant memories. For a long time she just sat there, listening to the silence. She felt warmer now, not because of the soup she'd eaten, but because she had played again. Playing the piano had reminded her who she really was, or who she used to be. Her name was Elena. Once, her life had been very different. She had grown up in a small but beautiful apartment filled with sunlight and music. Her father, Luca Moretti, was a man whose name once appeared on concert posters all across Europe. People called him a genius, a prodigy, a legend. But to her, he was simply her father, the man who made the world brighter every time his fingers touched the keys. When Elena was little, she would sit beside him for hours, her legs too short to reach the pedals, her tiny hands trying to copy his movements. He would laugh softly and say, "Don't rush, my little star. The music will wait for you." Their home was always full of sound, the soft hum of the piano, the rustle of sheet music, the laughter that came from their small family dinners. Her mother would hum along as her father played, and sometimes they would all sing together. But life, as Elena would later learn, can change as suddenly as a wrong note in a song. It began the year her father fell ill. At first, it was small things. He would cough between performances or his hands would tremble slightly. But the illness grew worse, stealing his strength and forcing him to cancel concerts. The family's savings began to shrink. The grand halls that once welcomed him started to book new performers. Soon there were bills they couldn't pay and letters they didn't open. Elena was 16 when she first realized her father might not recover. She remembered standing outside his bedroom listening to him practice. The melody was slow and uneven, his fingers missing notes he once struck perfectly. When he noticed her, he smiled weakly and said, "Even when the hands forget, the heart remembers." He kept teaching her until the very end. On his final good day, he asked her to sit beside him. Together they played a duet, his favorite piece, one he had written for her when she was a child. After they finished, he kissed her forehead and said, "Promise me you'll never stop playing. The world will need your music someday." That night he passed away in his sleep. Elena's world fell silent. Her mother tried to hold things together, but grief has a way of breaking even the strongest hearts. The music stopped. The piano gathered dust. The once bright apartment grew dim and empty. Within a year, her mother's health began to fail too. When her mother was gone, Elena found herself alone, with nothing but a few boxes of sheet music and the old piano. She tried to keep her father's memory alive. She played his songs, hoping someone would hear and remember him, but the world had moved on. People wanted new names, new stars. One by one, the things her family owned were sold: the piano, the furniture, even the photographs. The debts were too heavy to escape. She worked where she could, cleaning rooms, serving tables, but music was the only thing that ever made her feel like herself. Years passed, and she drifted from one city to another, carrying only her father's sheet music folded neatly in a small leather case. Sometimes she played in train stations or public squares. People would stop for a few minutes, listen, drop a few coins, and move on. Most didn't ask her name. It wasn't that she was forgotten by the world. It was that the world had never really known her. She had no family left, no friends who remembered her from before. Every time she sat at a piano, she felt her father beside her, whispering that the music still mattered. But the older she grew, the harder it became to believe that anyone still cared. That was how she ended up in that town, standing outside Café Luna in the rain. She hadn't planned to stop there. She had been walking for hours, searching for a place to rest. When she saw the piano through the window, something inside her told her to go in. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was her father's voice guiding her one last time. Now sitting in the park, Elena opened the small leather case she always carried. Inside were a few wrinkled pages of sheet music, handwritten by her father. The ink had faded, but she still knew every note by heart. Her fingers traced the title, Nocturne for Clara. Her father had written it for her mother long before Elena was born. It was the same song she had played in the cafe earlier that day. The moment her fingers touched the keys, she had felt her parents near her again, like the music had called them back for a little while. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly and smiled faintly. "I did it, Papa," she whispered into the night. I played again. A soft breeze passed through the trees, carrying the faint smell of wet grass and rain. She looked up at the stars and wondered what tomorrow would bring. She didn't have much, and no money, no home, no one waiting for her. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel completely lost. The next morning, she woke to the sound of birds. Her neck ached from sleeping on the bench, but she didn't mind. The city was coming alive again. Shop doors opening, buses rumbling by, people hurrying to work. She picked up her small bag and started walking. As she passed the cafe, she hesitated. Through the window, she saw the same piano sitting in the corner. The man from yesterday noticed her and waved. He stepped outside and smiled. "You're early," he said. She blushed a little. "I was just passing by." "Well, if you're passing by, you might as well come in," he said kindly. "People have been talking about you since last night. They said you made them cry." Her eyes widened. "I didn't mean to," he laughed. "Don't worry, it was a good kind of crying." Then, lowering his voice, he added, "You've got something rare. Something people don't forget." She didn't quite know what to say, so she just nodded. He offered her breakfast and a cup of tea. As she ate, she noticed a few of the regular customers glancing her way and smiling. A young boy pointed at her and whispered something to his mother. The woman smiled warmly and waved. It felt strange, people looking at her with kindness instead of pity. For so long, she had only known silence or laughter at her expense. When she finished eating, the cafe owner asked, "Would you play again? Maybe just one song?" She hesitated. "You really want me to?" "Of course," he said. "I think it would make everyone's morning better." So she sat down at the piano once more. The sun was shining through the window now, painting the room in gold. Her hands hovered above the keys for a moment before she began to play a new melody, one she had written herself, long ago when her father was still alive. It was a song about hope, about beginnings that come after endings. As the notes flowed, she felt lighter. The world outside the cafe seemed to fade away. She wasn't playing for food this time. She was playing because she wanted to, because she had something left to give. When she finished, the cafe was quiet again, that same breathless silence that had followed her first performance. Then came the applause, soft at first, then growing louder. Someone wiped away a tear. Someone else recorded her on their phone. Elena smiled shyly. "Thank you," she said again, though the words felt too small for what she felt inside. The cafe owner leaned over the counter and said, "You're welcome to play here anytime you want. You don't have to ask." Her heart swelled. "Thank you," she whispered. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as a beggar or a stranger, but as a person who mattered. That afternoon, as she left the cafe, she looked back one more time. The piano gleamed softly in the sunlight. She knew she would return. Something told her that this place was not the end of her journey. It was the beginning of a new one. As she walked down the street, people passed her without noticing who she was or what story she carried in her heart. But that didn't bother her anymore. She had her music, her father's memory, and a little corner of the world that had finally listened. She smiled to herself, whispering, "It's not over yet." And somewhere deep inside, she could almost hear her father's voice, when proud, gentle, and full of love, saying, "That's my girl." The next few days passed quietly, and for the first time in a long while, Elena felt like her life had a rhythm again. Every morning she went back to the cafe, and the owner always welcomed her with a smile. He would give her breakfast, sometimes a small pastry or a cup of tea, and in return she played the piano for the customers. Word began to spread. People started to come just to hear the mysterious girl who played with such emotion. Some said her music felt like a story without words. Others said it reminded them of someone they had once loved or lost. No one knew where she came from, and she never said much about herself. She only smiled politely and let the music do the talking. Each day, the little cafe filled up faster. The owner couldn't believe it. A few local reporters stopped by too, taking pictures and writing short notes. Someone even asked if she would give an interview, but she quietly refused. She didn't want fame. All she wanted was a place to play, a place where she could breathe again. One afternoon, the cafe was busier than ever. The sound of cups clinking, soft laughter, and gentle chatter filled the air. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Elena sat at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys. The cafe owner walked over and said, "You ready?" She nodded, smiling softly. "Always." She began to play. The song she chose that evening was slow and haunting, a melody that seemed to come from far away, the kind of song that made people stop whatever they were doing. The notes rose and fell like a sigh, delicate and full of feeling. Even the people walking outside the cafe stopped to listen through the open door. At one table sat an older man with a newspaper. His hair was silver and his face lined with the kind of wrinkles that only time and experience could carve.
He had come to the cafe by chance, hoping for a quiet cup of tea after work.
But the moment he heard the first few notes, he froze. His hands began to shake slightly. He knew that melody. He put the newspaper down and stared at the young woman playing. Her eyes were closed, her expression calm but filled with something deep, something familiar. When the song ended, the cafe erupted in applause again. People clapped, smiled, and cheered softly. But the old man didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on her. Elena stood up and gave a small bow before stepping away from the piano. The cafe owner handed her a cup of water. "You were amazing again," he said. "Thank you," she replied with a modest smile. As she sat down at her usual corner table, the old man approached slowly. His voice trembled slightly as he said, "Excuse me, miss. May I ask you something?" She looked up, a little startled but polite. "Of course. That song you just played," he said. "Was it your own composition?" Elena hesitated, then shook her head. "No, it was written by my father." The man's eyes widened. "Your father?" "Yes," she said quietly. "He wrote it a long time ago." The man's heart seemed to skip a beat. "What was your father's name?" She looked down for a moment as if unsure whether to say it aloud. "Luca Moretti." A hush fell over the nearby tables. The name carried weight, a name once known across concert halls and music schools. The old man's eyes filled with emotion. "Luca Moretti?" he whispered. "The pianist? The composer?" Elena nodded gently. The cafe owner, who had overheard, looked stunned. "Wait, you mean the Luca Moretti? The one who played with orchestras all over Europe?" Elena smiled faintly. "Yes, he was my father." For a moment no one spoke. It felt as if the entire cafe had stopped breathing. The realization spread from table to table and whispers filled the room. "She's his daughter?" someone murmured. "Luca Moretti's daughter. I used to listen to his records when I was a child." The old man sat down slowly, still staring at her. "I saw your father perform once," he said softly. "In Milan. He played that same piece and the one you just played. I never forgot it. It was unforgettable." Elena's eyes grew wet, but she smiled through it. "He loved that song. It was my mother's favorite too." The cafe owner shook his head in disbelief. "And to think, I almost didn't let you play that day." She laughed softly. "I'm glad you did." The old man leaned forward. "You play just like him?" "The same touch, the same feeling. It's like hearing him again." Her voice trembled slightly. "I don't think I'll ever be like him. But I try," he smiled warmly. "He would be proud. I can tell." A woman from one of the tables called out, "Do you know more of his songs?" "Please, play another one." The others agreed. People clapped lightly, their faces filled with anticipation. Elena hesitated. The room felt different now, heavier, more emotional. But she nodded and walked back to the piano. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play another piece, one of her father's later works. It was gentler, softer, like a lullaby for the soul. As she played, tears streamed down her face, though she never stopped. Each note felt like a conversation with her father, a way to tell him that she was still carrying his legacy, even in a small corner of the world. When she finished, no one clapped right away. The cafe was filled with quiet tears and gentle smiles. Even the cafe owner stood silently behind the counter, wiping his eyes with a napkin. Finally, someone whispered, "Beautiful." Then others followed, and soon the applause returned, louder, more heartfelt than ever before. Elena stood up, her face flushed with emotion. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for listening." The old man came up to her once more. "You should be playing on a stage," he said. "The world deserves to hear you," she smiled sadly. "The world has already heard enough. I'm happy here." He shook his head. "No, my dear. They've heard your father. Now they need to hear you." The cafe owner nodded in agreement. "He's right. You belong in front of an audience, not just this small place." Elena looked at them uncertain. She wasn't used to people believing in her anymore. She had spent years invisible, unnoticed. The idea of performing again, of standing on a stage, scared her more than she wanted to admit. That night, as the cafe closed, she stayed behind to help clean up. The owner made her a cup of hot chocolate and handed it to her. "You know," he said, "I think your father sent you here." She looked up puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, You walked in asking for food, but you brought something much more valuable. You reminded people what real music sounds like. You reminded me that kindness can change everything." She smiled, touched by his words. "Thank you. You gave me a chance when you didn't have to." He shook his head. "No. You gave us something to believe in." When she left that night, the stars were bright again. The air was cool and fresh. As she walked down the street, she thought about what the old man and the cafe owner had said. Maybe they were right. Maybe her story wasn't over yet. The next morning, a small article appeared in the local paper. The headline read, "Mysterious pianist stuns cafe crowd, daughter of late maestro Luca Moretti found." Someone had recorded her performance and posted it online. Within hours, it had been shared hundreds of times. People commented, calling her the lost daughter of a legend, the girl who brought back true music, and a miracle in a cafe. When she arrived at Cafe Luna that morning, the place was already packed. Cameras, journalists, and curious faces filled every seat. The owner looked both proud and overwhelmed. He waved her over. "You're famous," he said with a grin. Elena froze. "What do you mean?" "Your video went viral," he said. "Everyone wants to see you play again." She looked around, feeling a mix of fear and disbelief. Fame had never been her dream, not even when her father was alive. But as she glanced toward the piano, something inside her settled. This was where she belonged after all, not for the fame, but for the music. She took a deep breath, sat down, and began to play. The crowd went silent. Cameras clicked, people whispered, but none of it mattered. All she could hear was the sound of the piano, the voice of her father's memory, the warmth of her own heart, and the melody that had saved her. For those few minutes, the cafe was more than just a cafe. It was a stage, a home, and a reminder that even from the darkest places, something beautiful can rise again. And as the final note lingered in the air, Elena smiled through her tears. She had come to ask for food, and instead she had found herself again. The cafe had changed. What used to be a quiet little place where people came for coffee and soft music had turned into something else entirely. Every morning, a small crowd gathered outside before the doors even opened. Cameras flashed, reporters waited, and curious faces pressed against the glass windows hoping to catch a glimpse of the girl at the piano. Elena still arrived early, just as the sun rose. She liked those few quiet minutes before the noise began, before the voices, the questions, the flashing lights. The cafe owner always greeted her with the same warm smile, though he too seemed a little overwhelmed by how quickly things had grown. "You're famous now," he said one morning, shaking his head in disbelief. "I can't believe it," she smiled softly. "I don't feel famous. I just play," he laughed. "Well, the world seems to think you're something special. You should see what they're saying online. People from all over are writing about you." Elena didn't know what to say to that. She didn't even own a phone anymore. Fame had never been part of her dream. It belonged to her father's world, not hers. She only wanted to keep playing, to stay connected to the one thing that still made her feel alive. But fame has a way of finding people who aren't looking for it. That afternoon, a woman in a dark coat entered the cafe. She walked with confidence, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The customers turned to look. She wasn't a local. She had the polished look of someone from the city, someone who had seen many stages and concert halls. The cafe owner approached her politely. "Can I help you?" The woman smiled. "Yes, I'm looking for the pianist, the one they call the daughter of a legend." Elena looked up from her seat near the piano. The woman's eyes softened as she approached. "You must be her," she said warmly. "I'm glad to finally meet you." Elena stood, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" "My name is Clara Rossi," the woman replied. "I manage performers, musicians mostly. I work with concert halls and orchestras. I saw the video of you playing here and I was moved." "Truly." Elena smiled politely. "That's kind of you." Clara took a seat across from her. "I mean it. You have something rare. Your music has soul, not just skill, but emotion. People need that. The world needs that again." The cafe owner watched from the counter, curious but cautious. Clara continued, "I came here because I believe you deserve a stage. Not a cafe, not a corner in a small town, and a real stage. We could organize a concert. Maybe in the capital."
"I already have people interested,"
Elena blinked, stunned.
A concert for me? Yes, Clara said, leaning forward. You'd be honoring your father's legacy and sharing your own gift. Think of it. People filling a hall to hear your music, your story. You could make a living from this. You could rebuild your life. For a long moment, Elena didn't speak. Her heart was racing, but not entirely from excitement. A concert. A real stage. It was everything her father once had. Everything she had grown up around. But it was also everything she had lost. The applause, the lights, the expectations. She remembered them all. And she remembered how fragile they could be. I don't know, she said softly. It's been so long since I performed anywhere like that. Clara smiled reassuringly. That doesn't matter. Music doesn't age. Talent doesn't fade. You only need the courage to begin again. The cafe fell silent around them. Everyone seemed to be listening, waiting for her answer. Elena looked at the piano. It sat quietly in the corner, just as it always did. Worn, familiar, safe. She had found peace there. In the simple sound of its keys and the warmth of the people who listened without judgment. The thought of trading that for flashing lights and cameras made her chest tighten. I'll think about it, she finally said. Clara nodded. Of course. Take your time. But I'll be back in a few days. Opportunities like this don't come often. When she left, the cafe owner walked over. You okay? He asked. Elena smiled faintly. Yes. I just didn't expect something like that. She seemed serious, he said. Maybe this is your chance to start fresh. Elena looked down at her hands. Maybe. But what if I lose myself again? He tilted his head. Then you find yourself again, just like you did here. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the small room she rented above a bakery. The air smelled faintly of flour and sugar. She thought of her father's word. Promise me you'll never stop playing. She had kept that promise, though not in the way the world might have imagined. Maybe he would have wanted her to take the chance. Maybe he would have told her that music was meant to be shared, not hidden away. But fear whispered to her. She had lived through what fame could take away, how it could vanish overnight, leaving nothing but silence and sorrow. The next morning, she returned to the cafe as usual. People greeted her warmly, some asking if the rumors were true. Are you really going to perform again? They asked. She only smiled and said she didn't know yet. Later that afternoon, the old man who had recognized her father's song returned. He sat quietly, sipping tea as she played. When she finished, he called her over. You're troubled, he said gently. I can see it in your eyes, Elena nodded. Someone offered me a chance to perform again. On a big stage, he smiled. And you're afraid? Yes, she whispered. I don't know if I'm ready. He looked at her for a long moment. Do you know why your father's music touched so many hearts? She shook her head. It wasn't just because he was skilled, the old man said. It was because he played with truth. Every note he played was a piece of his life, his love, his pain, his hope. That's why people remembered him. And you have that same truth in you. Don't let fear silence it. His words stayed with her long after he left. When Clara returned 2 days later, Elena was ready to answer. I'll do it, she said quietly. I'll play. Clara smiled brightly. Wonderful. You won't regret it. Over the next few weeks, everything moved quickly. Clara arranged the concert in the capital city, a special event titled The Daughter of a Legend. Posters went up, interviews were requested, and excitement grew. Elena found herself swept into a world she hadn't seen since she was a child. Rehearsals, photographers, journalists asking questions she didn't always know how to answer. At first, it felt strange. She wasn't used to the attention or the fancy hotels, but when she sat at the piano during rehearsals, everything else disappeared. The music still felt the same. Her fingers still remembered. On the night of the concert, the grand hall was packed. People filled every seat, their faces glowing under the soft lights. Backstage, Elena stood alone for a moment, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She was wearing a simple white dress, nothing extravagant. Her hands trembled slightly, but there was peace in her eyes. Clara appeared beside her. Are you ready? Elena took a deep breath. Yes. When she stepped onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. The sight of so many faces looking up at her made her chest tighten again, but this time not with fear and with gratitude. She sat down, touched the keys gently, and began to play. The first notes echoed softly through the hall. It was the same piece she had played in the cafe on that rainy afternoon, Nocturne for Clara. The audience went completely silent. Every note carried her father's spirit, her mother's memory, and her own story of loss and rediscovery. As she played, she could feel tears welling in her eyes. She wasn't performing for fame or applause. She was playing for the little girl who had once sat beside her father, for the woman who had asked for food in exchange for music, for every moment that had led her here. When the final note faded, the hall erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, cheering, crying, clapping until the sound filled every corner of the room. Elena stood slowly, bowed and smiled through her tears. In that moment, she knew she had done what her father had wanted all along, not just to play, but to live through her music. Backstage, Clara hugged her. "You did it," she said. "You were wonderful," Elena smiled. "Thank you." But this wasn't just me. He was here too, my father. The concert became the talk of the city. Critics praised her, audiences adored her, and invitations came from everywhere. But that night, after everyone had gone, Elena sat alone on the empty stage. The lights were dim and the piano sat quietly beside her. She placed her hand on it and whispered, "I did it, Papa. But tomorrow I think I'll go home and to the cafe." Because for her, the true magic wasn't in the applause or the fame. It was in the moments when the music touched someone's heart, just like it had in that little cafe on a rainy day. The morning after the concert, the city was already talking about her. Newspapers carried her photo on the front page. The girl who once asked for food in exchange for music had filled a concert hall and brought the audience to tears. Messages poured in from around the world. Music critics praised her as a miracle. Some called her the rebirth of a legend. But Elena didn't see any of it. She was already gone. While the city buzzed with her name, she quietly packed her small bag, folded her simple white dress, and slipped away before sunrise. She left a short note for Clara, thanking her for everything but saying she needed time to think. Then she took a train heading back toward the little town where it had all begun. The ride was long and quiet. Through the window, the morning sun touched the hills, turning the mist into gold. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe. There were no cameras, no makeup artists, no journalists waiting for quotes. Just the rhythm of the train and the sound of her thoughts. She thought about the faces in the crowd last night. People who had cried, smiled, and clapped until their hands hurt. She thought about her father and how proud he might have been. But more than anything, she thought about the small cafe, the scent of roasted coffee, the soft hum of conversation, and the kind faces that had accepted her before the world remembered who she was. When she stepped off the train, the air felt different, gentler, more real. The streets were familiar, the kind that remembered her footsteps. She walked slowly through the town, passing the bakery, the flower shop, and the tiny bookstore where the owner always played old records. When she reached the cafe, she stopped. It looked exactly the same. The little sign swinging in the breeze, the smell of fresh bread drifting through the open door. Inside, a few early customers sat chatting over coffee. The owner looked up, surprised for only a second before his face broke into a wide smile. "You came back," he said, walking around the counter to greet her. Elena smiled. "I told you I would. I saw you on the television," he said proudly. "You were incredible. Everyone's been talking about it." She laughed softly. "It still feels unreal." "Well," he said, crossing his arms, "I hope the city didn't steal you from us." "Not a chance," she said. "I miss this place." He nodded toward the corner where the piano stood. "It's been waiting for you." Elena walked over to it. Her fingers brushed the keys. It felt warm, alive, like an old friend welcoming her home. She sat down, pressed a few notes, and smiled at the sound. "I never thought I'd say this," the owner said. "But that piano's part of this cafe now. People come in just to look at it, to hear it when you play. You changed this place." Elena shook her head. "No, this place changed me." She began to play softly at first, just enough to fill the air with a gentle melody. People turned to listen. Some whispered to each other, recognizing her. Others simply closed their eyes and smiled. After a while, the cafe grew busier. A group of students entered, then an older couple, then a mother with her little girl. The little girl stood near the piano, wide-eyed, watching Elena's hands move. When the song ended, the child whispered shyly, "That was beautiful." Elena smiled at her. Do you like music? The girl nodded. My grandmother had a piano, but she said it's broken now. Elena leaned down a little. Then you must promise me something. What? The girl asked. Never stop loving music. Even if you can't play it right now, keep it in your heart. One day it will find its way back to you. The girl nodded seriously. I promise. The cafe owner watched them with a soft smile. For him, it was clear. This wasn't the same woman who had walked in months ago asking for food. She carried the same gentle soul, but now there was peace in her eyes. Later that afternoon, as the cafe began to quiet down, Clara walked in. She looked different, tired but smiling. She spotted Elena and sighed in relief. I should have known I'd find you here, she said, setting her bag down. You really disappeared on me. I'm sorry, Elena said softly. I didn't mean to worry you, Clara smiled. You could have at least called. The entire city wanted to know where their star went. I'm not a star, Elena said, laughing. I just wanted to come home. Clara looked around. So this is the famous cafe? The place where it all started? Elena nodded. Yes, it saved me when I had nothing left. Clara sat beside her at the piano. You know, you could have stayed in the city. You had invitations from Vienna, Paris, even Tokyo. Big concert halls, big stages. Why come back here? Elena looked out the window for a moment before answering. Because I found something here that I never found anywhere else. Peace. When I play here, it's not about fame or money. It's about people. I can see their faces, feel their hearts. I don't want to lose that again. Clara studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. I understand. You always played with your heart, not your ego. That's what makes you special. Elena smiled gratefully. Thank you for believing in me, Clara stood. Just promise me one thing. Don't stop sharing your music. Even if it's only in this cafe, keep playing. People need it. I will, Elena said. Always. When Clara left, the cafe felt quiet again. The evening light began to pour through the windows, painting everything golden. Elena sat at the piano once more and began to play a melody she hadn't played before. It was something new. Soft, warm, full of hope. The cafe owner leaned against the counter, listening. That's a new one, he said. What's it called? She smiled. It doesn't have a name yet. Maybe home. From that day on, Elena stayed in the town. She didn't return to the big cities or the fancy halls, but her music still traveled. People who had seen her concert came from far away just to sit in the cafe, drink coffee, and listen. Someone even started recording her performances quietly and posting them online. The video spread again, not because of fame or a big name, but because her music felt human, real. One day, months later, the cafe owner told her that a foundation wanted to donate a new piano. They said it's a gift for the place that brought hope back to music, he said, handing her the letter. Elena read it and smiled. That's kind of them, but I think this one is perfect. It has history. It has heart, he laughed. You're right. I don't think anyone could replace this old thing. The years passed gently. Seasons changed, but the cafe remained full of laughter, warmth, and song. The walls carried stories, and the piano keys wore the marks of countless melodies. Elena continued to play, sometimes teaching children who came by after school, sometimes performing for travelers who had heard of the story and wanted to see if it was real. One evening, an old man entered the cafe. Elena recognized him immediately, the same man who had once told her not to let fear silence her. You kept your promise, he said, smiling. She nodded. Yes, and I found peace. He looked around the crowded cafe, the smiling faces, the flickering lights, the music filling the air. Your father would have been proud. Elena's eyes softened. I hope so. That night, after everyone had left, she stayed behind to close up. She wiped down the piano gently, as she always did. Then she sat down one last time, not to perform but to remember. She played her father's song again, Nocturne for Clara. The notes floated softly in the quiet room, wrapping around her like an embrace. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she could almost feel him there beside her. The warmth of his hand on hers. The quiet pride in his eyes. When the song ended, she whispered, "Thank you for everything." Outside, the night was calm. The streetlights flickered, and a soft breeze carried the faint sound of her music through the town. Somewhere, a passerby stopped to listen, smiling to themselves without knowing who played, and that was enough. She had started with nothing, hungry, lost, and forgotten. But through her music, she had found kindness, purpose, and a new life. She didn't need fame anymore. She didn't need applause. She had found something far greater: peace, love, and a home that listened. As she turned off the lights and stepped outside, she looked up at the sky. The stars shimmered above the quiet town, and she smiled. "I asked for food," she whispered softly, "but what I really needed was to be heard." And in the stillness of the night, it felt like the whole world was listening.